Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, disturbing books. I'm doing an update on my disturbing books project. So if you don't know, I've been doing this disturbing books project for over a year now, where I've been reading various disturbing books that were recommended to me in the comments for my review of this book, Noticed by Heather Lewis, which I called the most disturbing book I've ever read. And spoiler, it remains the most disturbing book I've ever read. I've read a ton of stuff over the last year and a bit, including a number of books I'm going to talk about today, but still nothing beats this in terms of how much it disturbed me personally. Now, clearly, everybody is going to have, different triggers, different things that upset and disturb them. For me personally, this is still the king, if you like, but it will be different for everyone. But yeah, that video had loads of recommendations in the comments for other disturbing books. I built up a list of those and I've been gradually working through them since I made that initial video. I've done updates. I think I've done a couple of update videos like this before on the project, but the last one was more than 6 months ago. I didn't realise I'd left it that long. So whilst most of the books, I think pretty much all the books I'm going to talk about today, I've done individual reviews for, apart from one which I'll be doing a review for very soon. I haven't done one of these updates for a while, so I thought it was worth talking about how I'm feeling about disturbing books now, what I've learned, if anything, and also what my plans are for the rest of the project. And I'm keen to get this project wrapped up soon because it has taken a long time, and it's deliberately taken a long time because I didn't want to read 30 disturbing books back to back. That would be too much for anyone. I've got, I think, a list now of 5 or 6 things that I still want to read in order to feel like I've read, a good breadth of stuff. So I'm going to wrap up finishing. I'm going to try and finish those books over the next 2 or 3 months. And then we'll do a final video, which I intend to be like a kind of tier ranking kind of video of all the books that I've read. So let me talk to you then about the things I've read since I last did an update video. So there's 2 Kindle books. So I'm going to talk about those first, and then I'll go through the physical ones. So the 2 Kindle ones, first one, and again, these are all things that are recommended in the comments on either that original Heather Lewis review or on subsequent books subsequent videos that I've done talking about this project. So the first one then is The Summer I Died by Ryan C. Thomas. So this was quite a tense and enjoyable horror novel, but it didn't disturb me particularly. So this is a book, like a kind of serial killer book about a couple of guys who are in the countryside. They hear a scream, they go to investigate, and they realise that there's this horrific killer operating. So it was tense. It was definitely very graphic. And it was a horrifying read, but I wouldn't have said it was disturbing. And it's interesting because, as I said earlier, different things disturb different people, and this felt like it had, maybe it went a bit further in some respects than other similar things I've read have gone. But it was, at the end of the day, it was, about a horrible serial killer, and there's tons of books and movies about that. So it didn't feel to me like it added anything particularly new to that. Another book I didn't particularly enjoy, but which arguably did add something new, albeit I'm not sure it's something that anybody wanted, was Woom by Duncan Ralston. So this is a very weird, kind of bizarro, extreme horror novel. Set in this hotel room or motel room where this guy has got a sex worker there and is doing increasingly weird things to her whilst telling her stories about other things that have happened in the same room. And it was kind of interesting, but also, as extreme horror often is, it felt biologically implausible at times and just a bit silly. So I could kind of see where Duncan Ralston was going with it, but it certainly didn't disturb me because it felt too ridiculous to be disturbing. It was quite disgusting at times, but it was not a book I enjoyed or took much from. Let's put it that way. Right, let's get into the physical ones then. So I've got a big stack in front of me here. These are in no particular order. So let's start with the one that I haven't done a review of on the channel yet, but I'm intending to do it very soon. Probably in the same week that this video goes up. So this is Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo. This is a really powerful book. But again, I'm not sure I'd necessarily call it disturbing for the most part. Towards the end, it does get disturbing, but for the most part, I wouldn't necessarily call it disturbing, but definitely powerful. So about a soldier, an American soldier in the First World War who's been horrifically injured and is lying in hospital. And it's just his internal monologue, like his memories about growing up, about how he came to fight in the war, about how he came to be injured, things that have happened to him, and just him trying to kind of claw his way back to some sort of sanity and normality. But a very, very powerful anti-war book. Ended up being, I think, a text that a lot of people read and talked about during the protests against the Vietnam War. Dalton Trumbo, really interesting character as well. So when I do my review, I'm going to talk a bit about Trumbo as a character, as a writer. But yeah, powerful stuff, but not necessarily something that I personally found that disturbing. Okay, moving on then. The Cement Garden by Ian McEwan. So this again, this was more disturbing and also very powerful and also very, very well written, as Johnny Got His Gun was. I wouldn't say that The Summer I Died or Woom were very, very well written, but these two books definitely were. So The Cement Garden is about a couple of, a family where the kids in the family, two teenagers, a boy and a girl, and a younger girl, get basically marooned for a summer because their parents die. And this is it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because that sense of, or that theme of children having to look after themselves and go on their own adventures, if you like, is a typical theme in children's literature. But The Cement Garden takes it in a very, very disturbing direction. I think it's no spoiler to say that it contains incest. I think that's something that is well known about the book, and that is a common theme in disturbing books. I've said this in some of my videos about disturbing books before. It seems to me that two of the most common themes in disturbing books are incest and cannibalism. Two of the great taboos of humanity. So this book, has a lot to say about incest and is definitely disturbing at times, but it's not necessarily a book that has left a lasting impression on me. And I think that's one of the things I like about doing these wrap-ups, where I go back a while later and think about some of the books that I've read, is that they are, when you've had time for those books to sit with you for a bit and to ruminate on them, it can give you that sense of how disturbing they really are. Many things when you're actually reading them in the moment can feel disturbing, but I think a really truly disturbing book is one that leaves a lasting impact on you. So this I thought was an excellent book, but didn't necessarily leave a lasting impact on me. Next up, something very different, but something that does explore one of those themes again, that theme being cannibalism. Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison, a very, very graphic horror novel about a relationship between a guy who's a necrophiliac and a woman who's a cannibal, and who in particular likes eating babies. So straight away, it's clearly going to be a disturbing book, but it's also a darkly comic book, and it has some interesting things to say, I think, about kind of obsession and things like that, and the way society treats outsiders, and the way outsiders are made to feel by society, and how that can spur them on to becoming even more radicalised, if you like. So yeah, very, very, very graphic, but again, it has not left a lasting impression on me. Some of the scenes in this book are absolutely horrifying when you're reading them, but it's not a book that kind of left me shaken, shall we say. Next, a book that did, I think has had a lasting impact on me, and certainly a book I still think about quite often. Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. So again, a book that is firmly in the horror genre, but one that is unusually political for a horror novel. So I think horror novels are increasingly talking more about politics, talking about discrimination and things like that in particular, and this book definitely does that. But this is one of the most political books, one of the most openly political books I've read for a long time. So it has at its heart a very kind of typical horror concept. So the concept of a haunted house, and in this case the haunted house is kind of a personality in its own right, and a really horrible personality at that. And it's about a traumatic event that happened in that house, and the impact of that event on two women subsequently who have gone on to, who were friends. The event that happened in the house fractured that friendship, fractured their relationship, and they've gone on to live very separate lives that end up clashing with each other. One of the women is a cis woman, one of the women is a trans woman. The author, Alison Rumfitt, is a trans woman. So there is a lot in here about that kind of that ongoing debate about trans rights versus women's rights. And it's very, very powerful in that, in the discussion of that debate and the impact of that debate on the lives of real people. But also this central figure of this haunted house is really, really effectively done. And that it's kind of, the house is kind of the embodiment of discrimination and hatred in the book. And as a kind of side character, you get this kind of demonic character of Morrison, the singer, who comes out of a poster on the main character's wall, and is equally horrific. So that theme of discrimination and hatred, really powerful throughout the book, and I thought it was really effective and definitely very disturbing at times because of that. The one scene in particular, which I thought was brilliantly done, which I didn't talk about in my review, but the scene where you learn, you see the truth of what happened in the house in the past, is told simultaneously from two perspectives, from the perspective of each of the two women, and it's incredibly well done and incredibly powerful. So yeah, I thought it was a really excellent book. Next, an interesting book to talk about. So this is The Second Suspect by H.E. Lewis. H.E. Lewis is Heather Lewis, who wrote Notice, the book that inspired this whole project. The Second Suspect is her attempt to rewrite Notice in a more marketable format. So Notice is a book about a woman who's a sex worker, who is taken in by this couple who are into kind of sadomasochism and things like that. And it's about the impact of that on her life. The Second Suspect turns that story, and Notice is told very much from the perspective of the woman. The Second Suspect turns that into a mystery story where the woman who has been taken in by the couple ends up being found dead, and a detective is investigating that crime. So it turns everything on its head. And apparently the reason Heather Lewis wrote it in this way was in order to sell it. So Notice was only published after her death. So she died of suicide, tragically young. And at that point, at the point of her death, hadn't been able to get Notice published. So this was her attempt to, turn it into something more marketable. And it's an effective thriller. It's definitely quite disturbing at times, but it's not nearly as disturbing as Notice is. And I think the reason for that is that we're so used to reading about horrible things happening in detective books, and you get those horrible things you get a filter put between you and those horrible things by the detective character, and often by science as well, by the kind of forensic analysis of the crimes and what's happening and that kind of thing. It gives you a distance from them, and it becomes they become a puzzle often, rather than horrific things that have happened to real people, whereas Notice feels like a book about horrific things that are happening to the main character. This is a mystery, so you are that much removed from the events. So still good, but definitely not as good as Notice, and definitely not as disturbing as Notice either. Okay, next up, a book that came up again and again in the comments. This is possibly one of the most suggested books in the comments. The End of Alice by A.M. Holmes. This is a book I did not like. And you know, that question of like, or did I enjoy, and things like that, it's a strange one to think about when you're talking about disturbing books, because, you know, I'm not sure I liked any of these books. I thought many of them were really, really good books. I didn't think The End of Alice was a really, really good book. It felt quite derivative to me. So this is a book. So A.M. Holmes is, you know, like a literary character, and many of the people I've talked about here are, I suppose McEwan is a literary character, isn't he? But a lot of the other people are, you know, more kind of genre fiction authors, or on the fringes of literary acceptability. Whereas A.M. Holmes, I think, is, you know, kind of firmly in the literati camp. So this is a book about a relationship between, like a long distance relationship over letter between a paedophile and child killer who's in prison for his crimes, and a young woman on the outside who is also a paedophile. So it's immediately obvious there's going to be disturbing content in here, and A.M. Holmes does not back away from that in any shape or form. And there's a lot of stuff in here that is about, like, self-delusion, so that, you know, the character in prison in particular, you know, has his own version of events, if you like, of what happened. And it reminded me a lot in that respect of, he reminded me of the central character in Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. But Lolita does it so much better. This book felt like someone who is probably quite a good writer, you know, doing an experiment in what it would be like to immerse themselves in the minds of awful people. And to an extent, she succeeds in that, but I don't really see the point of it. I can see the point of it for A.M. Holmes as a writer to have tried to do that. What I don't see is what's the point for me as a reader in reading it. I didn't feel like it had anything new or interesting to say. It just felt like something that was unpleasant to read. So yeah, that's my take on The End of Alice. Okay, next then, a manga series, so something a little bit different. So Blood on the Tracks by Shuzo Oshimi. So this is the first volume of that series. The complete series runs to 17 volumes. I did a review quite recently on the channel. This is really excellent and definitely very disturbing. So this is about the relationship between a mother and her teenage son. She is a very mentally disturbed woman, and that comes out in the way she, you know, in her relationship with her son. The book starts with her, so in this first volume, with her committing a kind of terrible act, and it's about the impact of that act on the family, and in particular on the mother and son. I thought this was a really well done series. It's really gripping. It's really disturbing. It's beautifully executed. So the artwork is, and if you watch my review video of it, I'd show some examples of some of the kind of artistic techniques that the writer uses, which I thought were really effective. So it's a really, really effective and interesting story. But it is, you know, it's very challenging at times, and it goes to some very, very dark places. So, you know, as all the books do on this list, definitely comes with trigger warnings. But I thought it was really, really, really excellent, and had, you know, much more interesting things to say than The End of Alice, which is, you know, this is a comic book. This is a work of literature, you know, published by Granta, the literary publisher, you know, with fancy French flaps. This is a comic book. I think this had much more interesting things to say than this. Okay, next a short story then, and an old short story at that, from I think the 50s, which is A Lovely Bunch of Coconuts by Charles Birkin, which is difficult to come by nowadays. Not currently in print, but I got it in this collection, The Shafts of Fear by Dennis Wheatley. So this was a very, very effective short story, set in a German prisoner of war camp during the Second World War. And I won't go into what happens in the story too much, because it's, you know, it's like 10 pages long or something like that, the story, but deeply, deeply effective. So basically about a group of Allied prisoners who are forced to do something to get involved in this horrible game by the Germans, the Germans running the camp. And written in the 50s, so written very, very close to, the end of the Second World War. So kind of doubly powerful, I guess, because of that. But what Charles Birkin does brilliantly in this, and it's the only short story I read by him, but from what I understand, this is a common theme in his stories, is that you kind of know as you go through the story, you build up in your mind what is really going on. And it's something, it's something really, really horrible. And at the end you find out, that really is what's going on, and it's just as horrible as you imagined. So it's not that style of short story that has a twist at the end. It's that style of short story that gradually turns the screw until at the end you are so focused on it, so absorbed by it, that at the end, even though you knew it was coming, is really, really effective. So I thought that was an excellent, excellent short story. And definitely one that has left an impression on me. Okay, I've got 3 more things to talk about. So next up then we have In the Miso Soup by Ryu Murakami. So a book about a young guy in Tokyo who's like a guide who takes tourists around the red light district, basically, who's taking this American tourist round, who it turns out, and I don't think this is a spoiler, I think this is kind of well known. It turns out he's a very troubled guy, let's put it that way. And the book in the second half has some horrific acts of violence in it. And it was, I thought this was a decent book. It's definitely gripping. It's definitely horrifying. It has not left, it has not left a scar on me, let's put it that way. But I did think it was an interesting and quite gripping read. But it does feel very much of its time. So let me check. I'm going to say it came out in the 90s, and we're just going to check that it did. Yeah, it came out in 1997. And it feels very 90s in its treatment of kind of male violence against women. It's reminiscent of, kind of early Tarantino and things like that in some regards. There was, I think, a kind of an obsession in filmmaking and books to an extent, but particularly in filmmaking, I think, during that time about, showing horrible acts of violence by men against women. It's something that came up again and again and was often in films that were very critically lauded. Looking back, I'm not sure that was such a great thing. I think at the time people felt like it was, kind of showing the truth about the world and things like that. You can certainly make that argument. But I think it was always done from the male perspective. It was always done by male creators. Not always, but typically. And I think that is less helpful than when, female writers and directors and things like that get involved in that conversation, which I think is something that is happening more and more, subsequently. So yeah, interesting and effective and gripping, but, not amazing. Okay, I've got 2 more books to go, so I'm going to save the most disturbing for last. So next up then we have Birdman by Mo Hayder. So this, again, is a serial killer novel, like whatever the other one. So like, The Summer I Died or something like that. So, or The Second Suspect, in terms of, using the detective as a filter between you and the horrible events. So this is about this detective, Jack Caffrey, who's got a horrible event that's happened in his own past, which is quite interesting and quite disturbing, but who is investigating a series of deaths of young women. And, the details of those deaths are what is disturbing about this book. What the killer is doing to these young women is truly, truly horrific. And really, that stuff is definitely disturbing. But again, it's a mystery novel. You feel somewhat removed from those events because they are not happening, in real time to people you care about. A lot of and there are some sequences later on in the book where, kind of characters are in peril from the killer, let's put it that way. But they are not characters, they are not central characters to the book. They're not necessarily characters you are deeply, deeply invested in the same way as I was invested by the central character in Notice. So it definitely has some disturbing stuff in it, but I didn't find it hugely disturbing. It is, however, a really incredibly gripping thriller, and definitely worth a read if you like that kind of thing. Okay, so let's close then with the most disturbing book I've read in this run, and that is The Pillowman by Martin McDonagh, which is a play. So very unusual for me to read plays. So this is a play about a set in like an unnamed country where a guy has been taken in by the kind of state police and is being questioned about a series of, I think, disappearances of children. And he's a writer, and it kind of reflects on, they've kind of pulled in, his things he's written, all different things he's written, and they're talking to him about those things and how there may be connections, between those things and the crimes. And you also get in here the relationship between him and his brother, and a load of stuff that happened to them in the past as children. So there's a lot. This is a slim book. It's a play that probably lasts, an hour and a half, 2 hours, that sort of length. But it packs so much into it. And some of the themes in this book are so incredibly dark, but also kind of universal in that they are things that you recognise as, happening again and again and again in the world. So both the theme of, kind of oppressive regimes and things like that, but also themes about, the relationship between parents and children, and some of the terrible things that happen to kids, in the world today. So I just found this incredibly effective, and part of that effectiveness comes down to it being such a quick read, but it packing so much in, and Martin McDonagh just kind of layers things on top of each other, so that the more you read, the more you understand about what's really going on, and the more horrifying it is. Really incredibly effective, and definitely very, very disturbing. So that was that's definitely my pick of most disturbing from the things I've talked about today. So that's what I have read over kind of the last 6 months or so. So I've got, let's check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 things to read, and then I'm going to call this Disturbing Books project done, and I'm going to make that tier ranking video. So the 5 things then are, so 2 of these I think are from the original list from that notice review. The other 3 are things that have kind of come up since then. So the 5 books then are Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter, which is a thriller, I think about like kind of snuff movies and things like that. So definitely a disturbing topic. I've read a few Karen Slaughter books in the past, and she's definitely a kind of disturbing end of crime fiction. So, solidly within the crime genre, but her books are often very graphic, and I've definitely found them disturbing in the past. And also just incredibly gripping. I think she's a fantastic writer of kind of suspense fiction. So that's one. We also have The Melting by Liz Spitt, which is a Dutch novel, I think, which I don't know a great deal about, but I think it's about kind of a coming-of-age story about children in this kind of small town. So intrigued to see what I think of this. I think it might be a bit literary and smart for me, but we shall see. Next up then, My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. So I've had this for ages. I've actually got a digital arc of this that I got from Netgalley, so I've had it since before it was published, but still haven't got around to reading it. Was reminded of it recently by someone I follow on Instagram. Definitely one I want to get to. I've heard nothing but good things about this book, but it is supposed to be very disturbing. So again, a book like Lolita that, and it's often compared to Lolita, that explores a very troubling relationship between an older guy and a teenage girl. Next up, I guess kind of the flip of that, but again a book that has been suggested a number of times. That's Tampa by Alyssa Nutting, which is based on true events, and is about a female high school teacher who seduces one of her male students. And then finally, from the extreme horror kind of end of the spectrum, because I think extreme horror does have the capacity to be truly disturbing, but I think often it is not. So, talking about something like Woom, like I say, I thought Woom was too ridiculous to be disturbing. So I thought I'd give extreme horror another try, because I haven't yet read an extreme horror novel, I don't think, certainly for this project, that I found, truly disturbing. Anyway, the book is The Groomer by John Athan. I've read one book by John Athan in the past, which I didn't particularly enjoy, a kind of jungle cannibal kind of book. This one, I think, is about a guy taking revenge on a paedophile who's, I think, murdered his daughter, something along those lines. So I expect it to to feature multiple scenes of torture, as extreme horror books tend to. We will see how I get on with that one. I'm not anticipating that I'm going to be blown away by it, but we shall see. So those are the 5 things that I'm going to read before I wrap this project up. So sorry, this has ended up being a very long video, but do let me know in the comments what you thought. Let me know if you've read any of the books I talked about. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.